So after playing their best Bears football in 2022 on their way to the top overall pick in the draft, the Chicago Bears spent their offseason trying to supplement themselves on both sides of the ball. And initially with moves such as linebacker Tremaine Edmonds and receiver DJ Moore, which they got in that trade to the Carolina Panthers, in that, like I said, trade from getting the number 1 overall pick to the Panthers in exchange for DJ Moore. I thought they had themselves a good offseason initially, and we're on track to a decent season. That was my preview thoughts when I talked about the Bears back in July of last year. Unfortunately, it's the same old saying of Bears football when you talk about them in the regular season, because everything that goes on in the preseason and in the offseason for the Bears, not exactly all that good translates into the regular season if you're Chicago. Because, well, when you look at what went wrong for the Bears in the regular season, it's pretty much all this offensive instability. Now, that's not to say that Justin Fields didn't exactly play poor compared to the previous years that he's been with the Bears for the last 2 years. In fact, he actually played a little bit better than his last 2. But when you look at him as a passer, which was my main number 1 goal for the Bears to hopefully see out of him, he had to be better as a passer, but he was very inconsistent at it. So when he needed to run, he would. He was a very good running quarterback. But when it came time to throw, when the Bears needed him to, especially when they were behind, it would become a two-way street of checking it down, throwing it big, and then making a bad turnover. So Fields did have some nice throws throughout the season, but many of them came against non-competitive teams. And then when he did make that big throw, he turned it over against good teams. So on top of that, with the Bears offense, the rest of the team was just very inconsistent as well. The rushing attack that featured Khalil Herbert and Roschon Johnson, they had their moments too, but they would just sometimes also have a bad day as well. Sure, they were one of the top rushing teams in the NFL, but it's just like, yeah, if you don't balance that with a good passing attack, then you're gonna have a rough day, and it's gonna lead to some of those losses as well. So speaking of the passing attack, DJ Moore and tight end Cole Kmet were the only featured offense options in the passing game. With Darnell Mooney, that breakout receiver a few years ago, he no-showed. He no-showed in a contract year for this team. Woof. And then, of course, let's also not forget, good old offensive coordinator Luke Getsy's play calling, where he showed a lot of courage with his running backs running it for nowhere, and then have Justin Fields throw a check down on a 3-and-out to punt it or go for a field goal, or maybe even on a 4th down. That's when they decided to throw it, and then it goes nowhere. So in essence, the offense mostly didn't hold up its end of the bargain for a defense that actually did kind of well for itself, especially when we talk about them later on. And then the other thing that went wrong for the Chicago Bears this season, well, it was just more of the same Bears football bullshit that happened throughout the year. So even when they would have a good day, to start at least, their coach Matt Eberflus would just always seem to get in the way. Seemed to forget that he would have to finish the story in order to win the games. There are multiple instances throughout the season where the Bears would be up big, but then they would fall flat on their face and let their opponents come back and win the game. It happened with it happened with the Broncos. It happened with the Lions. It also happened with, I believe, the Browns as well. So it's a simple case of bad coaching and taking your foot off the gas pedal. Now, it's not to say that the rest of the team is at fault, because it is as well. But at the end of the day, it also comes back at your head coach. If you don't coach up your team well to finish these games, then that's on you. So it ended up costing the Bears a couple of wins throughout the season because they played Bears football late in games. But on a more positive note, though, for Chicago, looking back at their defense actually did pretty good for themselves in the second half of the season. And one of the main parts of that was making a midseason trade for Commanders defensive tackle Montez Sweat. And some people were honestly really questioning why they even made this trade in the first place. And then even handing him a big fat contract like before the season ended. But when you look at the Bears, during the season when they didn't have Montez Sweat, they were struggling pretty much everywhere in just about every facet for the first half of the season. But once they made that trade for Montez Sweat at the deadline, they took a sudden 180. Now, not everything was perfect, but they did better in the front four. They became a heavy pressure, a sack happy, a better front four that can get to the quarterback a lot better. And corner Jalen Johnson, he also played a lot better too. And the run defense also heavily improved as well with the play of Montez Sweat. So Sweat's play was rewarded with a big fat contract, like I said, but also a Pro Bowl and All-Pro nod as well. And so far, his play and his contract, it looks to have been earned for both himself and Chicago. And I'd say they decently ended the season. I mean, sure, it also had a losing record, so it's not great. But yeah, they also lost to the Packers again, where their lackluster offense shined again. But they ended the season 6-5, a kind of winning record. And honestly, it could have been much worse, a much worse trajectory than when they started the season at 1-5 and going downward. And if you look at it on a more positive light for Chicago, despite ending the season at 7-10, and where things really looked lost for the Bears after they started off 1-5, with an inconsistent offense, they made some improvements on both sides of the ball to end the season. Yeah, sure, you ended at 7-10, but it's also not a bad way to end the season when you have a good amount of resources heading into an important offseason, including 2 first-round picks at number 9, and especially number 1 overall, considering that you own that pick from the Panthers, who managed to stumble upon the worst record in the NFL. So for Bears fans, it's not all that bad. Really, it's not. So looking at their offseason for Chicago, you have around $79 million in cap space at this time. So that's a lot of money. Yeah. That you're going to be spending. That's if Ryan Poles gets off his high horse. King Coles is the merry old Poles. Gets off his high horse and actually spends that money. So in terms of their draft picks, their first round picks, like I said, they're going to be picking first overall, which courtesy of the Carolina Panthers, unless if they trade that pick, and 9th overall, their regular pick. Now, like I said, remember the big trade last year for the Bears. They gave away that pick to the Panthers in return of their first round pick this year. So looking at some of the key free agents, fortunately for them, not too many to note of. So like last year, they don't have to worry too much about their in-house free agents, like receiver Darnell Mooney and edge rusher Yannick Ngakoue. They did make a couple of moves already before the start of the new league year, like firing offensive coordinator Luke Getsy. So we unfortunately don't have to meme him about putting up courage, looking at all my halfback dives and all that. So they did replace him with former Seahawks offensive coordinator Shane Waldron. So let's see how that goes once the season starts. And they also released safety Eddie Jackson and guard Cody White here. A little old, little bit on the aging side, so maybe they want to get younger at those spots, but they do have to replace them. They also franchise tag corner Jalen Johnson, so I'll get to that in a bit. They also traded for Bills guard Ryan Bates in exchange for a 5th round pick. A little bit of an interesting decision that they trade for him now rather than wait a week. I think he was a free agent, but it'll be interesting that they didn't wait a week to do that. But now they lost a pick. And they only have, I believe, 5 picks in this draft. So unless they trade away one of their first-round picks, then I don't know why they did this move. So looking at some of their needs to address in this coming offseason, which starts very soon, they got to figure out what to do at the quarterback position. I mean, as I noted with a couple of the teams that I talked about already, there's been this constant and conflicting rumblings on what the Bears are going to do with the top overall pick and their quarterback, Justin Fields. So it's going to be difficult what the Bears are going to do. They're kind of in this interesting position where they don't have a necessarily bad quarterback with Justin Fields, but they're also in a prime spot where they can get a top prospect at number 1 overall, that could potentially be that game changer for them in this time. So they have to decide, do they want to commit to Justin Fields, or do they want to restart with the golden opportunity that presents itself, whether that be Caleb Williams, Drake May, or maybe even someone else. So either way, the Bears are going to have to make a difficult but swift decision on whether to keep or delete Justin Fields and decide what to do at the quarterback position. Once they decide on the quarterback position, you got to get DJ Moore some help, because the Bears have absolutely no one around the receiver spot. Even if they were to re-sign Darnell Mooney, he had a very bad year. I don't even expect him to have another good year, but who knows? But either way, they got to consider using their normal 9th overall pick, barring they don't trade it, on using it on the second best receiver available in the draft. But before then, you got to find some more receivers in free agency. And then you got on the defensive side, you got to re-sign corner Jalen Johnson to a long-term deal. So Jalen Johnson was very good for them, only allowing under 200 yards in less than 30 catches while he was targeted. He only allowed 1 touchdown as well. This earned him All-Pro, Pro Bowl honors as well. So for Jalen Johnson, they got to sign him to a long-term deal. Get it done as soon as possible. So they should also consider signing some depth behind himself and corner Tyreek Stevenson, who also had a surprising rookie season. So for the Chicago Bears, it was a kind of down year for them. But this year, compared to last year, actually, that was a very down year. And this year was a slight improvement. But they should at least feel a little bit more hopeful. At least they should try to feel that things go up from here. So even with a taste full of riches to spend soon, they have some very interesting decisions that they got to make. And that starts with the quarterback position. That is, though, if their higher ups, including Ryan Poles, are willing to do so.